and welcome to Gunfighter Life, where we talk about all different aspects of gunfighting. I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. God and Christ is first and foremost in everything in my life, and this podcast is no different. You are certainly welcome to listen to this if you're not a Christian, but just realize that comes out in everything that I do, hopefully. And this podcast will be no different. A little bit about me. One of the reasons I started the podcast is because I wanted to share some real-world experiences, and everybody has their favorites and their opinions, but sometimes they're just kind of pie in the sky. They're not based on anything real and tangible. So I've been very blessed to have a varied background. I won't mention everything, but I'll mention a few things. I started hunting and fishing at a very early age. I've hunted all over this country. I've hunted everything from gray squirrels on the East Coast to prairie dogs on the West Coast and whitetail on the East Coast, big elk on the West Coast, and bears and wolves and lots of other stuff. I started shooting at a very early age, competition shooting, like formal shooting, not just going out in the backyard, but doing actually formal competitions. Did my first formal competition in 1998. I've won gold medals. I've won state championships, state level championships in all manner of disciplines, and both rifle and pistol, and I've competed in a lot of other disciplines. I've been very blessed to do that. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did 2 combat tours in Iraq. Infantry, carrying a gun, being a gunfighter being my primary job, and by God's grace, not anything to do with me, but just because I was very blessed, God got me back in one piece. After that, I went to work for L.A.P.D, where I worked regular patrol and some specialized assignments in some of the nastiest areas, the nastiest streets in L.A., and by that measure, some of the nastiest streets in the country. And again, by God's grace, carrying a gun as my full-time job, I got out of that in one piece. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time, and National Guard. A couple of different MOSs there, which is a couple of different jobs I did, combat MOSs. I also have been a professional firearms instructor, F.B.I certified, a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certified for quite a while. And my full-time job now is as a commander of a tactical team, a response team, where gunfighting is very much our day-to-day bread and butter, part of our everyday life, in a very big metropolitan area. I won't say who or what because it's in no way affiliated with this podcast, but just know that coming at this from a real-world experience and perspective, not just somebody with no experience, spitting out, opinions that aren't based on anything in reality. And like I said, I've got my favorites and my biases, and that is what it is. But hopefully they're grounded in some real-world experience. Today on Gunfighter Life, we're going to talk about Fieldcraft. And I might leave some things out, guys. If you don't know the production quality of this podcast, I am driving back from the shooting range right now, and I'm talking into my iPhone. And when I get home, hopefully it will save, because this is my second time recording this episode, and it didn't get saved the first time. And I will upload it. There will be no editing. There will be nothing like that. I will hit record, and I will submit it. So it is what it is. I do this podcast for you guys. Hopefully you glean something out of it. And I'm sure that you're not listening for the quality audio. But let's get started. Fieldcraft. I'll start off. Number 1 is testing your gear. There's a big difference in just going to the range and shooting nice little cloverleaf groups off a lead sled or off a rest. There's nothing wrong with that, and you definitely should do that to sight your rifle in, or your pistol in, or however you sight in. And your fundamentals should always be the basis of your training. But if you never get out in the field and actually practice it, then you're not really testing your gear. And testing your gear is important. You might find out that gun's really great at shooting a nice little ragged hole at 100 yards, but the thing weighs 9.5 pounds. And when you're carrying it from your car to the bench, it's like, 9.5 pounds, that's nothing. But when you're hiking up and down, the sawtooth wilderness of Idaho, covering quite a bit of elevation drop and gain, that 9.5 pound rifle that shoots a cloverleaf, you might decide, I want a 6 pound rifle with a smaller, lighter scope that, weighs 6 pounds, and I'm fine with an 1.5 MOA, 1.5 MOA, because I can't shoot what I can't get to, what I can't see. So that's something you'll learn in the field. And I don't care if you're a hunter or not. I know sometimes hunters in the tactical community get kind of a bad name as like FUDs or whatever. But I've done both, and there's things that you'll learn hunting that will transfer over into gunfighting. And you've heard my background, guys, but I could count on my hands the number of gunfights I've been in my life, and have fingers left over. So you're not hopefully going to get in gunfights all the time. So ways to practice that skill is just getting out in the field. And you can do that with or without hunting. You don't actually have to kill anything. You could do it with a camera. You could do it without a gun, just getting close to animals and being out in the woods or whatever kind of terrain, the desert, whatever kind of terrain you're in. And testing your gear is important. Not just about the guns, but little things like, do your pants make noise when you walk? One of the biggest things of Skillcraft is trying to walk quietly. So going out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, secluded, and sitting down and like letting everything be totally quiet, and then when you get up and walk around, realizing just how quiet you are. That's a skill I learned early on walking around the backwoods of Virginia, and I guess I didn't realize how well I had learned it, because every time I go out with somebody that's never really hunted or been out in the woods, it's just amazing how loud that they are, and it's not their fault, they just don't know. But when you're somewhere out of the city or in an environment that's quiet, and you're actually trying to walk quiet, that's a skill that will transfer over even into the urban environment. If you can be quiet and walk and roll your feet when you walk and know when you put your foot down that doesn't feel right, I'm going to step back and put my foot somewhere else because something's going to make noise there. That'll transfer over when you're trying to sneak down a hallway too, when you step on a board and it's got a little spring to it and you're like, don't step on that board, it's going to squeak. Something that I worked fugitive recovery for L.A.P.D, tracking down fugitives. That's a skill that transfers over. Being able to walk quietly in one environment, it might be a little bit different in another environment, but a lot of things transfer over. Learning stealth, learning to walk quietly, learning to check your gear, going back to checking your gear. Do my pants make noise when I walk? Do those keys jingle? I might not be able to hear it when I'm walking through the parking lot of Walmart with a bunch of people around in shopping carts, but if I'm trying to sneak up on a house, those keys can be pretty loud. So I might want to tape those up or put a rubber band around them or whatever it is. Testing your gear. Along with walking stealthily, one of the important things you might learn is that applies to gunfighting and transfers over from hunting is when not to shoot. Because when you're on a flat range and you're just shooting at paper, when you miss, there's really no consequences. When you're hunting, unless you're a psychopath, you really don't want to injure an animal. That's a horrible thing to do. Like, if you've ever seen an injured animal, it's kind of a gut-wrenching thing. Even me, that I've taken, I don't know how many animals, I don't want to see anything suffer. So knowing when that, I don't care how good you are, knowing when that shot is just a little bit outside your parameters. I can't guarantee that shot, and I'm not going to take it because I don't want to injure that thing. That's a skill that transfers over that's very important. Knowing when to wait a little bit longer and when to make the shot and when you just can't make the shot. And another skill that's kind of the opposite of that, but also very important, is knowing when to try to get a fine bead, as they say, not trying to get a perfect sight picture. If you're always used to shooting on the range with no time limit, if you've never done any kind of competition shooting, which I guess you could consider Fieldcraft, or any kind of hunting, like knowing that if you're waiting to get that perfect shot, it's usually not gonna happen. I recently took somebody hunting that had never really been hunting, and it wasn't their fault, and I took them hunting, and we saw these animals, and I was like, why aren't they shooting? And afterwards I talked to them, and they had only ever shot at a range, like at an indoor range or an outdoor range where the targets were stationary. The targets didn't move, and they were waiting for the animal to stop moving. I mean, I can't blame them, but animals aren't going to stand there and let you shoot them. they generally don't stand still. They don't want you to shoot them. So learning how and when to get a shot off when you can't get the perfect shot, but it's good enough to get a good solid hit and anchor that thing. That's important in hunting. That's important in gunfighting. Generally the first person to get a good solid hit on target wins the gunfight, not a perfect one. If you're waiting to get that perfect sight picture and your opponent gets a shot off that's a decent shot before you, that's going to mess up your OODA loop and mess up your trying to shoot back. So the first person to get a good shot fast is generally the winner of a gunfight. Not always, but generally. So you need to know, what your sight picture can look like at different distances and get good hits. And you'll learn that in Fieldcraft. You'll learn that, hunting prairie dogs of all things. You'll learn that, prairie dogs pop up and pop back down, or they move around. Like if you're waiting for that perfect shot, you might have to wait for that perfect shot on a prairie dog at 300 yards. But you may not have to wait for that prairie dog that jumps up at 50 yards. As long as the crosshairs are somewhere on him and you have a decent trigger press, not a perfect trigger press, but a straight back, you don't disturb anything, trigger press, you'll be fine. So knowing that. So Fieldcraft, knowing when to shoot, when not to shoot, and when your fundamentals are applied enough to get a good solid hit at whatever distances under whatever circumstances. And you're probably not, if you're in a gunfight, standing square, knowing exactly where your target's going to come from and exactly, you're not going to be there in your perfect stance and your perfect grip. Something's probably going to be off, and you're going to have to know I can make that shot, or I'm going to have to take an extra tenth of a second to realign my sights a little bit better to make that shot. You need to know that. A big skill that I personally have to work on all the time. I'm naturally blessed with a lot of things, but land navigation is not one of them. I get lost in urban environments. I get lost in, I've been lost in the woods and the wilderness before too, but I'm especially get lost in big urban environments where things just don't seem to make sense. So learning land navigation in the city and in the country. Learning land navigation is an important skill in Fieldcraft. You might look at something on a map and say, oh, I can do that. But getting actually out in the field and looking down in that valley, contour lines are one thing on a map showing elevation adjustment. When you get out there in the field and you look at it and you're like, man, that's a lot steeper than it looked on a map. And seeing a bunch of briars and brambles and looking at it and the first or second time you try and go through that stuff, the third time you look at it, you're like, hey, I'm going to walk around it. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to find a different route. I don't care if it's 3 times longer, it'll still be quicker, because trying to get through those briar bushes is going to take me forever, and it's going to be loud, and I'm going to scare everything away. So learning things like that, actually getting out in the field, learning about your footwear, like, these boots might be the new high-speed thing, but they rub my feet raw. I got blood coming out of my socks. Learning that I need to keep duct tape in my, I've got all this cool high-speed tactical gear. I've got this super high-speed plate carrier and this super high-speed belt and everything else, but I don't have any duct tape for when my feet start bleeding or when I start getting a raw spot, on this thing or that thing, which happens if you're actually out doing stuff. You'll get blisters and get raw spots. So you need to, you'll realize, hey, I need some athletic tape to prevent a hot spot from turning into a bloody mess that's going to be miserable for a week because I'm hiking around. You'll learn things like that. Just, and simple things like, hey, I need a neck gaiter because I get sunburn really bad on my neck and I don't like wearing a hat, so I need a neck gaiter, or just simple things like that. But if you're super sunburnt, that's pretty miserable for a while. And that's really going to put a hurting on whatever you're trying to do. Just simple things like that. Learning, a lot of something else you learning about your gear in Fieldcraft is what you don't need. You'll be surprised at how much crap that you don't ever use. And there's some things that you hopefully will never use that you should have on you, like a tourniquet. But you'll just find some things in your kit that it seemed like a good idea and it was super high speed looking, but you get to a point where you just have too much weight and you're like, this thing, I'm not going to use it. I don't need it. And that's another important part, finding out what's essential. You might find out that you've got so much crap that you you get back and you realize that you had something the whole time that would have been useful, but you forgot that you had it because you have so much crap you forgot what you had. So that's another important lesson that I've had to learn a few times about my kit and my gear. Learning patience, that's a great life skill, but that's something you'll also learn out in the woods, being patient. When you have to walk super, super slow to be quiet, when you have to be super patient, when you know that the wind is against you or the sun is against you or something's preventing you, and you just have to sit down and wait to sneak up on something. And so learning patience. Another great Fieldcraft skill, a great gunfighter skill, and a great life skill is learning to deal with solitude, learning to be completely by yourself, and not only enduring it, but thriving in it, and learning to embrace being by yourself. As humans, I think most of us, like to be in the confines of other people, but if you've ever been alone for a long period of time, you can learn to take advantage of that and to get things from that you'll never get when you're around other people. So solitude is another one. Learning how to be by yourself and operate by yourself. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm thinking about hunting because even though it's still really hot right now where I live, just this time of year where it starts to just a little bit cool down always got me thinking about hunting. I love hunting and being out in the woods and the wilderness, and not necessarily kill anything. Like I said, you don't have to hunt. You can just get out in the woods. I went up hiking around the north rim of Grand Canyon not too long ago. I also went up to Colorado not too long ago, hiking around and being out in the woods. And just being out there, I don't have to shoot anything or kill anything. Just being out there and being in the woods and seeing. I saw elk. The person I was with saw a mountain lion, saw bobcats, saw tons of deer. Just being out, you don't have to actually kill anything. But if you can stalk up and sneak up on a deer, then you can sneak up on a person. If you can be quiet walking through the woods in the fall, you can be quiet walking through a city environment, walking through gravel in a parking lot. So learning and knowing that. A couple of things, just the little examples for me, like talking about learning about your gear. I hiked for quite a ways, and I had a fairly new pistol that I had taken out and shot. I wouldn't take it out in the wilderness and trust my life to it unless I knew that it was reliable and it was hitting where I was aiming. But when I got back, I went to practice again, and I was doing my standards, and I was missing. And usually most of the time that's the shooter, not the gun. But I was shooting, and I couldn't figure out while I was missing. Usually I could diagnose, like, oh, I'm doing this, and that's why I'm missing. But I was missing, and I couldn't figure it out. And towards the end of my session, I realized that my front sight was loose. So I'm not blaming myself for those misses. Usually I do, but when you got a loose front sight, there's only so much you can do, and I didn't know it was loose. But testing your gear, that front sight, in my hike, had worked loose. It had not been Loctited from the factory, and I know better. I've learned that lesson before. I should have taken all my screws and stuff out that were important like that and Loctited them myself. I've learned that lesson before, and I've seen other people. The last rifle class I took, I saw that happen. The last time actually I took out and trained guys at the range, I saw not the last time, but I think the time before that, I saw somebody's sight come loose on their rifle. And I know better, but I had to learn it again in the field that, hiking around in that repetitive motion worked my front sight loose. Test your gear, test your equipment. Now that sucker's Loctited, and short of anything crazy, it probably won't come loose again unless I want to take it off. I learned recently about gaiters, so I recently discovered some really good boots that I like, and they're great for hiking. I can't believe that in all my years it took me so long to find these great hiking boots. And they're great, but they're like a mid-length, and most of my pants, when I'm hiking, they come up, and then if I'm hiking through any kind of stickers or briars or cactus, I get stuff stuck in my socks, which is super annoying. And every couple hundred yards, I got to stop and pull crap out of my socks, or I got to keep walking, and my ankles start getting rubbed raw or bleeding because there's stuff in my socks. So I found out that I could have either gotten new boots, which I didn't want to do because I love these boots, and or I could have gotten longer pants, which I don't want to replace all my pants. So I found another solution, which are called gaiters, which are these little things you might have seen like they were on World War I or World War II, or they keep mud and briars and things out between your boots and your pants. They make some really light ones. I bought them. I tested them out. They work great. And if I'm walking through terrain where that's not an issue, I just take them off. They weigh almost nothing and hang them on my kit. But if I get in terrain where I need them, where it's wet and I want to keep the water out of my socks or keep cactus out of my socks or keep prickers out of my socks, I take these gaiters and put them on. And I put them on once and they're good to go. And they work pretty well. So just learning about stuff like that. And that's something that you won't know unless you got out and tested. If you have all this super nice, I don't care what super tactical gear you have, if you don't test it, you have no idea whether it works for you or not. I have spent a lot of money on, I have a duffel bag literally full of gun accessories I generally don't use because they're stuff that I've gotten and tested out and found out, it works, but it's not the best for me, or it doesn't work at all, or the thing's crap, or whatever. And that's something you're not going to know until you test it. And by testing, I don't mean there's a time and a place for going to a flat range. Almost all the time when I practice the fundamentals. But there's a time and a place to get out and run something on a timer, on a clock, doing man-on-man competitions, pushing yourself. How fast can I shoot? And then you'll realize, this holster catches. Or this button release doesn't work. I got to take a Dremel to it because I can't get a full grip on my gun in the holster like this. Or, you'll find stuff like that out. And by Fieldcraft, it doesn't have to be hunting. It doesn't even have to be hiking. It can be, like I said, doing a man-on-man steel challenge competition, which, if you don't know, is kind of like drag racing with a pistol. It could be something like that. It could be, you and your buddies getting out and doing, setting up sporting clays, walking through a valley, and the other partner calling out, and then you got to drop down to the ground and shoot whatever, sporting clays you can see. At different distances, knowing how fast you can get those hits and recording the time, and then seeing how he does it fast. I'm just throwing out things that you can do for training. It can be anything like that. It can be, there's no limit to what you can consider Fieldcraft. It could just be getting out and doing a hike, learning what kind of terrain you can pass and what kind of terrain you can't pass, realizing, hey, you need to up that cardio. You do a lot of bench press, but you got to do more cardio because bench press isn't really helpful when you're trying to hike up a mountain. Learning things like that. One of the things about working out I got to remind myself is that I do a lot of upper body, but my upper body in practical real life will not do me any good unless my lower body gets me there. My arms can't do anything until my legs either get me there or get me out of there. So, just learning things like that in the real world. So, with that, I'm pulling into the parking spot at home, so I am going to pause this, and as I said, I'm going to go upstairs and sit down before I work out and upload it, and hopefully you guys gleaned something from this. Hopefully you learned a little bit. So, I love theorizing. I love looking at gun books and ballistic tables. I'm a nerd when it comes to that stuff. I love looking at, the next gun that I want to get or whatever, but that does not replace getting out and training and getting out in the field and learning to, stalk up on a living animal or, things like that. So you need to get, I guess, an easy way to put it is get your hands dirty and get your feet dirty on, don't be afraid to get messy. Thanks for listening to Gunfighter Life. Have a blessed day.